Hello, everyone. I found out this week that the makeup and skincare company that is called Youthforia is going to be shutting down its business. And this is a company that certainly has been the subject of quite a lot of conversations and controversy over the past 2 years. And so I thought that this would be worthwhile for me to talk about on my channel. And the reason for that is because I do have a background as a marketing academic. And so I did my PhD in marketing from the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University. And then I worked as a marketing professor. And I also have some background consulting for quite a few different large companies, basically focusing on how to create better relationships with their customers and figuring out what customers' needs and wants actually are. And then in addition, I did write some articles and some books, and one of those books you can actually still get on Amazon, I see, and also some marketing case studies in the past. And so I thought that the situation with Youthforia could be an interesting case study for us to think about, both in terms of the issues that may be faced by companies that are competing in the beauty industry and also for companies in general as they attempt to do business in the current environment. And so let's talk first about just the background of Youthforia and about their founder. Her name is Fiona Ko-Chen. And so she said that her grandparents were from China and that they fled China for Vietnam at one point, and then that her parents fled Vietnam for the United States. And she graduated from Dartmouth in 2013 with a degree in economics, and she went to work for the tech industry, and she was selling complicated software to data centers, she said, and she was focused on the Asian market. And so she ended up living in Asia during the pandemic early years, 2020 and most of 2021, because that's where she had been working. And so at that time, she was in about her late 20s. And so right about the time of the pandemic was when she started to work on this particular company. And what she said was that she had no experience whatsoever in the makeup or the skincare industries, but that she had always been interested in that, and that she started to think about these particular issues because she was living in some really polluted cities in Asia, and she was not having control over the food that she was eating or other things in her life. And she found that her skin started to be really easily irritated by all of the makeup that she was able to find. And as she thought about it, she thought about the fact that in general, people are told that they should not wear makeup to sleep in and that it is bad for your skin. And then her thought was, well, if the makeup is bad for my skin when I'm sleeping, then it's probably not going to be very good for my skin when I am awake. And so I think that it might be interesting to create a line of makeup that would be good enough for my skin that it would be okay for me to sleep in. And although not everyone has sensitive skin, she felt like that could also be a good hook for her to talk about in interviews and to suggest to people that this was an unusual enough makeup that you actually could sleep in it and that you didn't need to necessarily have to worry about it if you did fall asleep in it as an angle to have something to talk about. And her husband came up with the name Youthforia, and the reason that they picked that name is because they thought that it reminded them of the happy experiences that you have when you are an adult and that remind you of when you were a child. So things like going to your grandparents' house, for instance. And so she did not have any contacts in the makeup and the skincare industry at all. And so she said she did a lot of Googling to try to find people, and she met with people and then got them to introduce her to other people. And that she made an awfully lot of mistakes at the beginning and went in a lot of the wrong directions. And that eventually she started to seek out manufacturers, and so she flew to Korea and she met with some manufacturers there, and she eventually picked a company that she felt comfortable with. And she said that after many different iterations, she came up with her first product. And this turned out to be a blush that was color changing. And so it looks green in the bottle. It's like a transparent green. But that when you put it on your skin, it changes into a pink color that is fairly muted and that is supposed to be appropriate for all skin tones. And so I'll try just putting a little bit of this on. I already have a little bit of a really muted powder blush, but I'll put a little bit of this on and you can see what you think. And so I kind of think that that is accurate, that this is not so bright that it looks unnatural on me. It just looks like I kind of have a little bit more of a natural flush. And I do think that on me, at least, this is an appealing color. And I do feel like this product and all of the Youthforia products actually have been very good for my sensitive skin. I haven't had any problems with any of them. And I do think that even though I feel like these products are more designed for younger people than I am, I'm age 61, that nonetheless I think that they all have worked well for me and that I've been able to use all of them. And so the way that she launched the company was by making some TikTok videos and just posting them and not paying for them, but just sharing it. So what she did is use this blush and then she compared it on the other cheek to like a powder blush. And so these TikTok videos started to take off really fast, like within a couple of weeks, and people did start to be interested in this product and to order it, and so they did sell a lot of products really, really quickly. And then soon after launching the blush, then she launched 2 more products. So there's a primer that is called Pregame Primer, and this is a product that doesn't have any scent in it, and I do feel like my skin works really well with this. And then there also is a lip gloss. And so she did start to sell quite a lot of product through TikTok, and then people that purchased the product seemed to be happy with it and would purchase more things from the company. And so within the first 18 months from when she started to sell the products, they had $2 million in sales, and 50% of that was direct to consumer, 15% of it was through Amazon, and 35% was through wholesale accounts. And she said that at the end of the first 18 months, that 82% of the revenues had originated through the organic channels like TikTok. And so by early 2023, the company had been in business for 18 months, and that was the point where Fiona Ko-Chen went on a program called Shark Tank. And so she asked the 3 investors if she could get $400,000 in exchange for a percentage ownership of the company. And it seemed like all 3 of the people that were the investors did seem to be impressed with the business success of the company so far and also with Fiona Ko-Chen's negotiating skills. And 2 of those sharks actually made offers. And so the one that ended up getting the offer gave her $400,000 in exchange for an 8% stake in the company. And this is a person named Mark Cuban, who is quite wealthy. And during the Shark Tank, she did talk about her product costs. And so what she said was that for the first 3 products that they had introduced, the product cost was $26 to $38 in terms of what they were selling it for. And she said that the landed costs, which is apparently the amount of money that it costs to actually get the product from overseas and to pay all the import issues and to get them into the warehouse here and ready to be sold to either a local retailer such as Sephora or else through the mail order was $4 to $6 landed costs. And then a few other things that happened in early 2023 for them, which was still about 18 months in. They got into Ulta, and she said that they were online and also 309 doors. And JCPenney, there were another 300 doors. And they also were being sold on Revolve, which has some international shipping options. And then I think soon after that, they started to be sold at Credo, which is a cleaner beauty type of a retailer that has a few stores and also a pretty large online selling business. And so what she said about these products was that her goal was to have them all be really differentiated. So she wanted all of them to be not like any other products that were on the market. And so over that next period of time, they did introduce a number of other products. So there was a setting spray, and the setting spray had a number of skincare ingredients in it, and it also was supposed to be good for the skin, which did make it quite unlike other setting sprays that were available at the time. Most of those tended to be very irritating to the skin, at least for me. And the other thing about this setting spray is that it has a pink color, so her sense was that if your skin was looking kind of sallow because you hadn't been getting enough sleep or haven't been living right, that the pink color would give your skin just a little bit of life and a little bit more prettiness and healthiness. And then she decided to come out with a different blush. And so these are actually tinted blushes, but they're also in the oil formula. And I do feel like as an oil blush that all of these blushes, both this kind and the color changing one, that they go on the skin very nicely and that they did not turn into as much of a mess as a lot of the other blushes that I've been using. And then there is also a cleanser. And this cleanser I did talk about in my big video on cleansers. And I would say that of the gel type cleansers that are out there, that this one actually was one of the ones that my skin actually was able to tolerate quite well. And another big PR hit for them was when they went on CBS Morning, and this was in May 2023, and so they talked to Gayle King and to a couple of the other people on that show, and at the time, Fiona said that all of the products that they were making were supposed to be appropriate for all ages and all skin types and all skin tones. And then the next product that was introduced was the foundation. And so this is called the Date Night Foundation, and it was introduced in August of 2023. And unlike most foundations that seem to be introduced to the market now, this was a foundation that I think is solidly medium coverage, and that it actually does provide quite a lot of coverage of any kind of issues you may be having on your skin. And in addition, this has quite a lot of skincare ingredients in it, so it has several different kinds of hyaluronic acid, and it has prickly pear extract and coffee seed extract, so it's supposed to be anti-aging and good for puffiness. And it only has a 6-month usage life, and I think that the reason for that is because it doesn't have a lot of really heavy-duty preservatives in it. Now, preservatives definitely can make a foundation last for a long time, both on the store shelves and also after it's opened, but the other issue with those preservatives is that they do tend to be irritating to the skin. And I do think that especially 2 years ago when this foundation was introduced, but even now I do think that this is one of the better foundations that I have found in terms of how my skin has reacted to it. I do think that it hasn't been irritating at all, and that the skincare ingredients in this have been really good. Now, I did find for me that it was a little bit on the heavy side in terms of exacerbating the look of my wrinkles a little bit, and but I did find eventually that if I mixed this with a little bit of moisturizer to make it more into a little bit more like a tinted moisturizer, that it actually turned out to be one of my favorite foundations. And I did do a full video on this, I think, toward the end of 2023, and talked about my own experiences with it. And like all of the other products from Youthforia, this product is made in Korea. And so this product cost $48, and it launched with 15 shades. And I would say that of the reviews that I saw at the beginning when people were looking at this, that really people mostly did seem to be liking it, including some people that were YouTube-type reviewers and also consumer reviews. Certainly not everyone likes any foundation, but I do think that there was a lot of positive word of mouth about this product at the beginning. Now, the issue with this product, of course, turned out to be the shades that they were offering. And so according to what they said on the website, the initial shade breakdown was for the 15 shades that they were offering were as follows, that there were 2 that were supposed to be fair, there were 2 that were supposed to be light, 3 that were supposed to be light medium, 3 that were medium, 2 that were supposed to be medium deep, and 2 shades that were described as being deep. And they also did claim that these shades were flexible and that you could use them on a variety of different skin tones. And what I will say is that this is supposed to be a medium coverage foundation, and that I do think that the level of coverage in this product, if I'm not mixing it with a moisturizer to make it thinner, I do think the level of coverage of this is quite high. And so that being the case, I do think that for a medium coverage foundation, 15 shades is really not very many shades at all. And so if you are going to offer a foundation, I think that is offering that much coverage, then that means that ipso facto you're not going to be getting a good shade for every single person that is out there. And so then the question is, if you can only afford to launch with 15 shades, who are you going to leave out? And one review that I did see at the beginning of September was a review in Allure, and this was on September 1st, 2023, and this was a review that was written by someone who had fairly dark skin, but not really dark skin. And so this person said, with over 2.7 million people talking about this on TikTok, I decided to give it a try. And she said that at first she was skeptical with regard to whether the darkest shade would work for her, but then she said that once she blended it into her skin, it was barely detectable and that she did really, really like the formula. Now, of course, it is the case that Allure is very, very advertiser-centered, and I don't think that they would ever say anything negative about a product. But I do think that this product looked pretty good on her dark skin. But again, her skin was not super dark, and she was using the darkest shade of the product. And then later on in September, there was a review that was released by a content creator who is on TikTok and Instagram, and her name is Gloria, or I think her full name is Gloria George. And what she largely does on her channel is to try on the darkest shades of foundations that are made by various companies and to see how they work for her, because she does have very, very dark skin. And so the video that she did, she seemed to be looking forward to trying on this particular product, and she showed the picture of the sample that was demonstrated on the website, including the sample of the product and the model that they were using. And that model did have fairly dark skin, and it looked like the product was fairly dark on the page. But when she tried it on her face, she said that it was way too light for her and that the color looked much different than it did on the website. And so what she said in the video, she said, "I feel like I've been lied to so bad. There is no way that these are the same 2 shades. In 2023, for you to be lying about your shades online and for this to be your darkest shade, maybe we should take a step back." And then after this video, then a lot of other people who had dark skin or deep skin did try out the foundation for themselves. And some of them said that there was no shade for them, either because there wasn't the right undertone or because there wasn't any shade that was deep enough. And then some of them did say that one of the shades that was offered by Youthforia did work for them. And so this did continue to be a bit of a public discussion, and there was a little bit of coverage of that in the news media as well. And so as a response to this, Fiona Kochen released a video, and what she said in the video is that this foundation was not intended just to have 15 shades, but that they couldn't afford to make shades for everyone right off the bat, and what they needed to do first is to see if people actually liked the product, and that if they did like the product, then more shades would be introduced, and that this was a proof of concept. And so this did get some criticism from a lot of people. And so, for instance, there is a fairly large YouTuber, and I guess she has channels on other platforms as well. And her name is Jackie Ina, and so she has 3 million subscribers on YouTube. And what she said about that explanation, she said, "This is BS. What you are basically saying is that anybody that is lighter than a tan is going to be the case study for this product. What you're inadvertently saying is that anyone who isn't dark-skinned is the default, and that if they like it first, then the rest of you will get it. You're basically saying that everybody else is an afterthought. If you can't launch this product for everybody, then the way to launch it is to make sure there's an even ratio of light shades, medium shades, dark shades, and deep dark shades. And if you don't have the money to launch this in the way that it needs to be launched, then don't do it. No one's asking for it." And then after that, then quite a lot of people discussed this issue, and some people mentioned that Fiona Kochan had not apologized in her initial video, that it was just an explanation, and they didn't accept her explanation, and that they felt that this was really problematic or racist. And then after a while, then a second apology video was released, and in that video, Fiona Kochan said, "I'm extremely sorry. With our latest launch, we just fell short of our mission. We're just a tiny brand. That doesn't excuse the fact that some of you guys don't feel seen or included, and that is unacceptable, but I'm trying to be better." And so then she said that she was trying to talk to some community leaders and to get input on shade development for them to create some more shades. And the other thing that she said is that all of the shades on our website reflect the products that we actually sell. We would never alter the tones of our photos before posting them online. And if you would like to be part of the change, we're always looking for community feedback. And so, as I say, all of this discussion went on starting in September of 2023, and then by March of 2024, the company actually offered 10 additional shades. And what I will say is that that is really, really soon for a company to expand to offer more shades, especially if they had not had that in their plan. And what Fiona Kochan said in an interview in a business magazine was that their original goal was to spend 2 years before they released more shades and to work on the development of the shades during that time, but that they had decided to speed up the process, and instead they spent only 4 months developing the shades before bringing them to market. And the shade breakdown at that point, there were 4 shades that were fair light, 4 that were light medium, 2 that were light medium, 3 that were described as medium, 3 that were described as medium deep, 2 that were described as medium deep to deep, or 6, and 6 that were described as deep. And so I would say that in terms of at least the descriptions of the shades, in terms of how Youthforia was classifying those shades, that this was certainly meeting the criteria that Jackie Ina had suggested in terms of how the shade breakdown should be in order to make it more fair. And if I'm not wrong, the company did take their 2 darkest shades and they sent them out to a number of different influencers that have dark skin, including Gloria George, to my understanding. And so Gloria George did do another video on the company, and this came out on April 29th of 2024, so this was about a month after the product was released. And what she said in her video was that the darkest shade was actually just pure black without any undertones. And so what she did is a comparison between the Youthforia shade 600 and just plain black face paint that she bought at the store. And she said that they looked exactly the same to her, and that the shade that had no undertones in it and was just pure black was not one that any person could wear, and that if you have really, really deep skin, no matter how deep it is, you still have undertones and your skin is actually not really black in that way. And so several times in this video, she described this particular shade as being minstrel show black. And then in general, what she said was, this is shade 600, and then the shade right next to it is shade 590. You guys, there could be 10 more shades in between these 2 shades. And not only that, when we go to the website and we look at the swatch, not only is the swatch online literally jet black, there's literally only 4 or 5 shades for people who have dark complexions. It's not really for black people, if we're being honest. Not only in 2024 is this so disgusting and disrespectful, but this needs to be pulled off the shelves. And so this video eventually ended up being super viral, and it got 47 million views, 3.5 million likes, 97,000 shares, and 22,000 comments on TikTok. And then there were a number of other videos discussing this topic that got quite a bit of reach also. So first of all, there is a makeup developer named Javon Ford, and he said that he looked at the ingredient list and that this particular foundation only contained black iron oxide and no colored pigments. And he did a video and he said, this problem is so avoidable. She literally could have used NARS or Fenty as the benchmark, and this brand does not care about us. And there was another video from a creator from South Sudan who also has very dark skin, and she said, this is a slap in the face. This should be a crime. And so there turned out to be quite a bit of news coverage in TV news and national magazines, and some people that were covering the topic, such as in long YouTube videos, they also got a lot of views. So for instance, there is a creator on YouTube named Jen Love, and her video got more than 1 million views. And so, of course, there was a lot of discussion about people who suggested that the company didn't care about them or that the company was racist. And then some of the other comments that seem to have been fairly frequent include the idea that the company had gotten frustrated with people complaining that there weren't shades for them and that they had purposely offered a shade that no one could wear as a kind of an FU. So it was the case that in addition to this shade 600, that there were a number of other shades that were described as either deep or medium deep that were in the final 25 shades that were sold by Youthforia. And so one question is whether or not those actually provided people with good options, even if you take away the shade 600. And so in another video, Gloria tried shade 590, and that is described as being neutral with cool undertones for deep skin. And she actually did say that that product was deep enough for her skin, but she said that it had cool undertones and that she couldn't wear it for that reason. And then there was another influencer whose name is Nidali, and so she did a video where she tried on shade 600 and shade 590, and shade 600 was one that she was not able to wear, but she did say that shade 590 was a good match. Now, as I say, some of the other products are described as being deep, and they do look like they are deep on the photos on the Youthforia website and on the Ultra website, but I don't know how deep those actually are or how many people could wear those, and I really wasn't able to find very many videos of people trying on those particular shades. Those were not the shades that Youthforia had sent out to people with dark skin, and so I don't know that many people went and bought them after this news about shade 600 broke. And so the TikTok video talking about shade 600 by Gloria dropped on April 29th, 2024, and by the first week of May, just within a few days, Credo dropped the whole line from their website. And the brand was dropped also by Revolve, so that was their international sales arm. But it did continue to be sold on Ulta, and then it also was sold on Amazon through the Youthforia people. And especially on Ulta, there were an awfully lot of negative reviews of that foundation and then also of Youthforia products in general. And at some point during all of this discussion, someone unearthed an older video on TikTok from Fiona Ko-chan where she had been just working to release the foundation, and what she said in the video was that I'm super stressed because I need to find a model for the darkest shade of our foundation. We reached out to modeling agencies and it was really hard to find models for our 4 darkest shades. We held casting calls and filmed models for all of our shades except for our darkest shade. And this is Youthforia's darkest shade versus Fenty's darkest shade, and the Youthforia 600 was much darker than the darkest shade from Fenty. And so we are street casting, asking people if they ever thought about modeling. We're literally going to malls and cafes. We have only a few days left to launch this, and we've already been ghosted a few times, and I hope we can find a model within the next few days. And so where she was filming this video was in Dubai in a shopping mall. And so eventually she found a couple of people that did have very dark skin. And so she ended up using one of those people as the model for shade 600. But there was a question about whether or not that foundation shade actually matched that person. And so some people suggested that the model actually didn't have very much of the foundation on his skin, or else that the foundation had been mixed with the lighter shade in order to make it work on his skin, and I don't know if that was true or not. And so this time Youthforia's response was not to do anything. And so there was no response at all from the company, and they were not posting anything on their TikTok or any of their social media accounts, and they were just quite silent for more than a month. And then about a month after the video from Gloria dropped, there was an Instagram post that Youthforia did share, and the Youthforia post did just say that their goal was to create a line of cosmetics that was more diverse, and so therefore that they were working to hire someone to work to produce more inclusive products, and that they hoped that people would submit their resumes. And at that point, this foundation was still on the market, but the following month, which was July 2024, they did withdraw the shade 600 from the market, and they reported that in a comment on one of their previous Instagram posts rather than on a separate post. So a lot of people objected to the fact that this announcement hadn't been made in a wide enough way. And then on September 24th in 2024, there was a Women's Wear Daily interview with Fiona Ko-Chen, and what she said was that she had hired a person to be the new product development director who had a background in inclusive foundations, so she had worked for Roma Beauty, and her name was Obi Jemadafi, maybe, and that this person also had worked for Beyonce's hair care brand, and she was from Nigeria. And Fiona said in that interview that they had rushed the shade expansion process both on their end and on how fast they were making their labs move, and that their goal was to put processes in place to test products on all skin tones and ages and skin types before release, and that they were going to be working with makeup artists and beauty veterans and influencers from product ideation to launch. And then on September 25th, Fiona released an apology video, and she talked about the same sorts of things that she had talked about in that interview, that she had rushed the process and rushed the lab, and that during the controversy, that was when she was giving birth to her son, and so therefore she wasn't able to focus on what was going on as much as she wanted to, and she said she wanted to think things through and to understand what was happening before responding. And then she talked about the fact that she had hired a new colleague to head up product development, and that she was going to try to do better, and that she was very sorry. And so for the next 10 months or so, the company continued to post regularly on their social media accounts, but it was all about products that had already been introduced, and it seemed to me to be fairly standard, routine types of posts that would probably not be the kind of thing that would go viral. And then on August 6th, the company announced that it was closing. And so now I will talk about some of the thoughts that I have had on this particular situation, especially from the PR aspect of it. And so first of all, of course, the idea of how many shades companies should have and who should be covered for those shades when they are small companies and cannot afford to introduce the foundation that they want to introduce for everyone. That is a really difficult problem, and that is one that I do want to talk about. But the other problem with the initial launch was the fact that some people were saying that the shade that was actually in the bottle and they were putting on their skin appeared to be a much lighter shade than the one that was depicted in the website photos, and that they felt that that was deceptive. I do think that when that was found to be the case, that it probably would have been a good idea to go back and change that picture, even though it did make it really clear that the shades that were being offered were mostly for just people with tan skin or lighter than that, because I think that if people buy a shade that they think is going to have the potential of being dark enough for them, and then they find out that that shade is much different than what they ordered, then you are just making people kind of mad at you. And I don't think that Youthforia actually ever changed that photo, and so I think that that was something that probably would have been a good idea. And then the other thing that it seems pretty obvious that they did wrong, and that everyone seems to be admitting that they did wrong, is to have rushed the process. And so they sped up the development process for more shades from 2 years as it was planned to 4 months. And 4 months is a kind of a ridiculously small amount of time to do that much work. And so it is really not surprising that mistakes were made. Now, I do wonder if they may have been under some retail pressure to do it really fast. And so my hope would be, if they had gone at a more normal pace, that they would have realized more easily that the problems existed in the shades that they had, and that they would have reversed course and not introduced that particular shade that made people so upset because it didn't match anyone. So, of course, that shade was a disastrous mistake, and I think that we can only speculate on why that happened, because we don't have any actual reports from or explanation in terms of why it happened, except for the fact that the process was rushed. My own guess about this, and I'll just share it because other people seem to have been perfectly comfortable sharing their own guesses. I have spent quite a lot of time in Taiwan. And my experience in Taiwan, at least when I was there a while back, is that there were very few white people that I was encountering, and that there were really almost no black people at all. And I imagine that Korea may be somewhat like that. And if they are, and I think that what may have conceivably happened is that Fiona just told the Korean foundation manufacturers that she wanted a shade that was as deep as possible or as dark as possible, and so they just took her at her word and gave her one that was as dark as possible, without ever having seen very many people with dark skin. So they seem to be very good at creating foundation shades for people with light skin, but dark skin, they may not have as much experience. So even if this is what happened, I don't think it's any kind of excuse. I think that it all was horribly negligent. But if people think that this was intentional, then that may be something that's a little bit different too. And so now let's talk about the question of shade ranges in foundations, because I do think that this is a topic that has changed a lot in terms of how people are seeing it over the past few years, and I do think that it has created some real difficulties and some real limitations, especially with regard to how small companies operate. And so over the past 10 years, companies have started to introduce foundation lines that have a lot more shades, such as 50 shades or more. And so producing a line that has that many different shades in it is extremely expensive, especially in terms of the initial investment, and especially if you are a smaller company, that may be prohibitively expensive in terms of this being something that you can do. And so for each of these shades, you need to purchase a minimum number of bottles. And so when you get to the point where you have a large number of shades, then that turns into a really, really big capital investment that you are hoping that you are going to get back. But depending on how many bottles of the product you actually end up selling through, you may not end up getting that money back at all, ever. And so I think at the beginning, when companies like Fenty and House Labs started to offer all of these different shades, that people were really excited about it, and they were really pleased that they could just definitely get a shade for them that was a good match in any of these brands. But I think as time has gone on that something has changed, and it's not just that people are excited about it, but that people are expecting that all brands are going to be doing this. And so for a small company, that does create a dilemma, because if you are a small company, offering this many shades may be really out of reach for you, especially if you want to offer a product that is of higher coverage. So if you're offering a skin tint, then you may be able to get away with offering 10 shades, even 5 shades, depending on how light the coverage is, 15 shades, and that may be enough, and you may be able to gather enough money to do that. But if you're offering a foundation that is medium coverage or fuller coverage, then you're going to have to offer an awfully lot more shades if you want to cover everybody, and so that may be very, very expensive. And then the other thing is that if you are offering a foundation that is natural ingredients, which was the other motivation of Youthforia, is to offer a foundation that didn't have tremendous amounts of irritating preservatives in them, then that is going to be another issue, because if you don't sell a particular shade, enough of it to sell through all of the bottles that you have, then you may end up just never selling it and having it go bad first. And so I think that that is the reason why companies fight so hard against the concept of clean beauty. And I also do think that that is a reason that Fiona, for instance, was not able to find any foundations that didn't irritate the heck out of her skin, because companies do want the products to last for a long time on the shelves so that they don't end up having to throw them away. And so therefore they put a lot of preservatives in them, in addition to putting cheap ingredients in them to make it be less expensive. And for people like Fiona and for me, when you put all of those preservatives in the product, then that does result in skin irritation. And so for me, this actually was a very good foundation in terms of not irritating my skin, and also in terms of how it performed. But I will say that it does have a 6-month usage life on the bottle, and so therefore I can imagine that it also doesn't have a very long shelf life, and that at some point this stuff is probably going to go bad. And so if you don't sell it all the way through pretty quickly, then that's just a permanent loss for your company. And so let's do a little bit of math to think about this. And so she said that the landed costs for instance, her blush and her primer were $4 to $6. So let's, just for the sake of easy math, we'll assume that the landed costs are $10 for this particular bottle of foundation, and that there is a minimum order size of 1,000 bottles for each shade. And I don't think that's really unrealistic either. That may be on the low side. And so in that case, if you want to get the product to market at the lowest cost possible, it would be $10,000 per shade. And so therefore, if you're launching with 30 shades, then that would be a $300,000 investment. And even for a small company that is doing extremely well, that would be a really significant investment. So for instance, Mark Cuban purchased an 8% stake in Youthforia for $400,000, for instance, and that was a company that was doing much, much better than the vast majority of the small makeup companies that are out there. And so I think with a new product, and especially maybe with the new foundation, there always are going to be some questions about whether it's going to be a hit or a miss. And so I do think that there may be really strong motivation to start out by selling just the shades that you know are going to sell the best, and then to see how they do before you launch the rest of them, rather than spending a lot of money on the shades that you know are going to sell less well, and knowing that if the launch does not succeed, then eventually you may end up having to throw many of those bottles just in the trash. And so I think that until a couple of years ago, the assumption was that you were going to order the shades that you were going to sell the best, and that only made sense as a business proposition, and that way you could get the product to market. and that some people could try it, and then that eventually that if it was successful, then you would roll out and you would offer more shades. And I think that until probably 5 years ago, that was just the way that companies did business. And of course, the number of bottles that you still have a particular shade is going to vary based on what the foundation is like and what your marketing is like. So for instance, if you are selling the type of a foundation that is going to be attractive to younger people, like people in their teens, then I think that you are going to probably be selling more bottles on average of shades that are not for people with just plain light skin, because that particular age group does tend to be more diverse. And of course, if you are doing a collaboration with someone like Rihanna, then you may find that certain skin tones are attracted to that person and that you may sell more of those shades. But in any case, I do think that there can be a tremendous disparity in terms of the number of bottles that you sell of a particular shade, and that some shades are just going to sell much, much more in terms of products than other shades. And I do think that this is something that is quite well predicted in advance, and that if you are deciding how much product to order, you have a pretty good sense of which shades are going to be selling really well and which shades are not going to be selling very well, and how much money you are going to be putting on the table and not getting back very fast if you order those shades that don't sell well. So if I put myself in the mind of a small business owner, then I would say that really the number one job of a small business owner in general is usually to keep costs as low as possible so the company stays afloat rather than going bankrupt. That includes by saving money wherever you can, and also reducing risk. And I think that in the beauty industry, a big risk is that you are going to buy products they're not going to sell through and that you are going to have to throw them away. So if you're a small business owner and you are just starting out and you have a limited amount of money, then I would say that really the general strategy is to spend as little money as possible on overhead and to spend as much money as possible on products that are going to sell really well and that are going to sell really fast and that you can sell at a good margin, so you can get some money back from those sales and then invest that money in other products, and that is how companies grow. And the idea of spending some of the precious cash that companies may have on products that they do not believe are going to sell very well and that are just going to sit around, that is really antithetical to the whole small business mindset. Because in general, if that is what you do, then you are not going to be in business very long and you're going to go out of business really, really fast. And I think that this problem is exacerbated a little bit when you are moving into retail stores. And so, for instance, Fiona said that she was going to be in 300 Ulta stores and 300 JCPenney stores, which is 600 total. And so if we assume, to do a little more math, that they needed to have 2 bottles of each shade in each store, then that would be another 1,200 bottles in addition to the product that they wanted to keep at their headquarters to fulfill the direct sales. And so if you think that a shade is going to sell through really fast and that you're going to sell a lot of it, then that is certainly a motivation to go ahead and buy it and put it in the stores. But if you think that a shade is not going to sell and it's just going to sit in the store and not sell, then you're not going to be getting very much money from that. And if you're putting it in a retailer, you don't get much money even when you do sell the product through. And in that case, I think that there is a particular motivation to just restrict yourself to the shades that actually are going to sell. And so I do think that it's a very predictable math problem. And so if what you see in the numbers is that if I pick this particular mix of shades, version X, that is going to result in my making a lot of profit, and if I pick this mix of shades, which is version Z, that a particular mix of shades is going to put me out of business, then I think it's very hard to pick version Z in that case. So at least left to their own devices, I think that this is how every single small business company in the world would be thinking about this problem as a math problem. But if we look at how this problem is discussed in the online world, we almost never see it discussed this way. I almost never have seen the idea that certain shades are going to be selling better than others when people talk about this issue. And instead, it seems to have gotten to the point where we are only talking about it in terms of fairness. And so, for instance, we have Jackie Ina's comment that if you can't sell as many shades that will cover everyone, then the only thing that you can do is to sell equal numbers of shades, some of them for light people, some of them for medium people, some of them for dark people, and some of them for extra dark or deep dark people. And that if you do anything else, then that is unacceptable. And so from the consumer perspective, and if you think that everyone has the equal right to get a shade, then that may seem fair, and maybe that is fair. But from the small business perspective, then if you are going to result from that particular strategy as not making any money and going out of business, then that seems like even if that is fair, that is not something that can be pursued. And so what I would say is that this is exactly what is happening, that a lot of companies have just decided that they are not going to offer foundations at all. And so therefore, although I feel like very often we are seeing a new blush introduced on a daily basis, there really are very few foundations that are out there. And that even the big companies are not offering that many foundation releases, and that small companies are really offering virtually no foundation releases. And insofar as foundations are released, that most of them are in skin tints that do not require there to be as many foundation shades for everybody to be covered. And when we do see new foundation releases, even skin tints, but I think especially fuller coverage foundations, that virtually all of those are from brands that are either owned by really, really huge and extremely profitable corporations, or by brands that have been very, very heavily funded and gotten millions and millions of dollars in funding by venture capitalist type organizations. So my question here is, do we think that's okay? Do we think it's okay if small companies simply can't launch foundations, and that if they do launch a foundation, they can only offer a skin tint? And do we think there's enough foundations on the market, and that it's okay if the only foundation launches that we are seeing are from these great big companies? And I will say that some of the people that have been the most vocal with regard to commenting on these shade issues and on the Youthforia situation, that some of those people do seem to be implying that that is fine with them and that they don't have a problem with that. And so, for instance, Gloria in her viral video stated, "Sometimes it's okay to say, hey, maybe my brand is not made for complexion." And Jackie Ina said, "If you don't have the money to launch this in the way that it needs to be launched, don't do it. No one's asking." Now, I will insert here that I do have a little bit of a problem with that thought of no one's asking, because I think that that is implying that no one wants this foundation and that no one needs it and that you are just doing it for the sake of doing it. And I don't really agree with that. I think that there are quite a lot of people that actually did appreciate the Youthforia Foundation, that they did get quite a lot of reviews that were really positive, and that those reviews tended to be drowned out by the complaints about the shade issues, but that nonetheless, if we talk about the fact that this foundation, whether or not it actually core characteristics apart from the shades, whether or not it actually had merit to it, I actually do think it had merit to it. And I do think that there were a lot of people that were able to get something from this foundation that was not easy to get from other foundations that were out there. And so I think this is part of a general question that we as Americans should be sort of thinking about at this point, and that is whether or not we want small businesses to succeed in general, or whether we're okay with having corporations that are very wealthy and that are owned by the market in general and in particular by really wealthy people, whether we are okay with having those companies be the main ones that are offering products for us. And so if we look, for instance, at LVMH, which owns Fenty in collaboration with Rihanna, I guess, that is owned by a person named Bernard Arnault, who is from France. And so he is the sixth richest person in the world, and he is worth $139 billion. So a question may be, how did Bernard Arnault get so rich? And I would suggest that it's sort of in the same way that most companies get rich, which is by offering products that do not cost very much to make, get really high margins, and at not paying employees very well, and by doing everything that they can to drive competitors out of the marketplace, and also by buying products from manufacturers by not very much money and putting a big markup on those products in terms of their retail arm, which is Sephora. I mean, that's really just how business works, sort of in a nutshell. And so the question is that what we want for the uber wealthy to be owning the entire makeup business and for smaller companies not to be able to compete at all? And so personally, I don't necessarily think that when we do things that allow the people that are already super wealthy to make more money and make it more difficult for small businesses to make any money, I don't personally feel that that is a good thing for society. So I'm not personally saying that I think that LVMH is a bad company or that Bernard Arnault is a bad person. And I certainly buy lots and lots of products through both LVMH and through Sephora for my personal use and to review on this channel. But I do think that it's healthier for everyone in terms of the society for there to be competition and for the competition to not just consist of a couple of huge companies, but rather for smaller companies that are concerned about innovation and that do have different points of view to be competing in the marketplace. And so to the extent that those companies can be supported, that is something that I feel is a core value of mine. So let's talk about what the motivations of the people that are insisting that there needs to be more shade inclusivity and that shades need to be equally distributed across the skin tone spectrum seem to be wanting. And when I first started looking at this issue, I felt like what they wanted was that they wanted to be able to go in the store and buy a foundation, and that their frustration was that in the past that there weren't any good foundations for them and that they weren't getting products that actually worked for them, or that they would have to mix different shades together in order to use a particular foundation, and that was frustrating and expensive. And therefore that it was really a functional argument and that they really just wanted to be able to buy a foundation that they liked in their shade. So increasingly, I'm wondering if that is actually the main goal, because I think that if that were the main goal, then I think it would be perceived to be more acceptable to launch at first with just a few shades and to have those shades be the most popular shades, and then over time, when you got more money and the brand proved to be successful, then you would launch with enough shades for everybody. And so even if you didn't get the shade that you needed right off the bat, you would get it eventually. And that does not seem to be something that a lot of people are necessarily finding to be attractive or even acceptable. And what I seem to be hearing more from people who are commenting or who are content creators are comments such as, if you can't launch with enough shades for everyone, then just don't launch. Or if you don't launch with enough shades to begin with, then don't bother to offer my shade for me later because I'm not going to buy from you. Or here are 17 different luxury foundations that I already own, and these are all already in my shades, and so I don't really need yours, and you don't need to be offering any shades at all. And so based on these kinds of comments, it sort of seems to me that the issue here is not so much that people feel like there are a dearth of foundation options for them and that they would like to have better foundations and that they hope that the better foundations that are out there will be available in their skin tone so they can use them. But as people talk about this issue, in some cases they have talked about the idea of just this being a issue of respect and about the idea that with a history of racism and colorism, the idea is that if you have a darker skin tone, and especially if you have a really dark skin tone, that this has suggested in a lot of cases that people don't respect you as much as they respect other people. And so I do think that when people talk about this issue, they do seem to talk about it in terms of whether or not they think the company respects them, appreciates them, values them, and if they are not offering a shade, then the inference that people seem to be making is you don't value my business and you don't value me as a person, and therefore that they are taking the position that this is racist and that this is a problem. So I think that that's really different than the inference that I tend to make if a brand is not offering a proper skin tone for me. So for instance, if I purchase a product from LYS and I see that there's not an appropriate bronzer shade or an appropriate foundation shade, then my conclusion is, well, this brand, they're in theory they're targeting everybody, but their real target is people with darker skin, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Or I may say that a brand is not offering a particular shade for me and I have to mix two different shades together, and that is not very smart of the brand because I have a really common skin tone, and so they are losing a lot of business and they're just not very good at their business. Which is quite different than for me to make the inference that these people do not respect me and that they don't value my business and that they are not valuing me as a person. I would probably never think that. So let's talk about the question of whether or not small business owners that have makeup companies should even be thinking about foundations, and if so, what some of their options might be. And so the first option is just for these companies to just conclude that they really can't make foundations and that this is way too expensive and out of their league and that they need to focus on other kinds of products. The second strategy is that you might want to offer some kind of a foundation but not have it be a very high coverage one, so you may want to have it be particularly light, and if you do that you may be able to get away with offering fewer shades. And if we look at the way that most small companies have addressed the problem until a few years ago, then basically what you are doing is saying that you are going to be offering the most popular shades first, and then once you get your footing, then hopefully you will offer more shades. And that is problematic because that is not consistent with what people are demanding. And I think it's also kind of problematic now more so than in the past because as we have moved on, the population, especially if we're talking of the United States, has gotten more diverse. So therefore, if you offer just 5 light shades, now you're going to be covering a lot less of the population than you might have 50 years ago, and especially if your brand is targeting a younger market. So even if we look at this just straight from profitability rather than from fairness, it still is the case that this is not going to be as good of a solution as it was for people in the past, because if most people are not going to be able to get their shade from a particular foundation, then that foundation is probably not going to be a success. And then the third option is, of course, what, for instance, Jackie Ina is suggesting, which is that if you are going to introduce a product, that you need to be introducing it so that there are equal numbers of shades in each category. So I'm not saying that it's unprecedented for a small company that is self-funded to launch a foundation in this environment. Some companies are doing it, but I think that when they do it, they are doing it by launching a lighter coverage foundation that doesn't require there being as many shades, and I still think it's quite difficult to get the amount of cash that you need to do that. And so now let's move into a few more ideas that are a little bit more unusual. And the first of these is to charge different amounts of money for different shades. And I actually have seen this done with a few different companies. And so the company that I saw do this first was called Evan Healy. And this is a company that is a natural type makeup brand. And they have an all-natural foundation that actually does go bad quite quickly. And it is available in 17 different shades. And the regular price for this foundation is $32. However, every time I have looked at the Evan Healy website, the foundation has been available in all of the shades. You can buy it, but they have the darker shades, which right now it's the darkest 7 shades from the tan shades to the deepest shades, available at half price for $16. And I think that the reason for that is because some of those darker shades are selling less well. And so therefore, in order to get the foundation to sell through before it goes bad, that if they offer it at a lower price, then they can increase the amount of sales that they are making by a lot. Now, I don't know to what extent Evan Healy sells their products through stores. And I also don't know to what extent when they do sell them through stores, when the stores are selling all 17 shades versus, say, the lowest 8 shades. So I do think it's sort of unfair for a company to be selling just the lightest shades through the store. But I think that it could be that if you are offering the darker shades at a lower price through your website, that might be perceived as being more appropriate and more fair, or even a good thing, because people that wouldn't be able to afford the foundation at the regular price may be able to really buy it and afford it at half price or 2/3 of the price. Another company that does something a little bit like this is also NARS. So NARS has a product called the Light Reflecting Foundation, and they have 51 different shades listed on their website, and 5 of these are sort of random shades that are available only online. And so some of these are lighter, some of these are darker. And so on the website, those 5 shades are available for $37.80, whereas all of the shades that are available in stores are $54. So I think that even for big companies, there is a little bit of precedence to do some kind of price differentiation, and to have products that are being sold only on the company website to be a lower price, and then to have products that are available in stores be a higher price. And so if we think about this in terms of Youthforia, I think that if Youthforia had offered, for instance, their initial launch of 15 products only in stores, and then they had offered another 15 products just through their website at a half price for $24. I think that could have been a really attractive thing for a lot of people, because certainly $24 would be a really good price for a foundation, and so a lot of people might have been interested in using it. And if most of the shades that were available on the website were darker shades, then people might have felt, conceivably, and I want to find out if people really think that people might have felt like the company was actually giving them a good deal, and that they actually did want their business if they were willing to sell the products for less money. And I think that if Youthforia had been selling these certain shades only on their website, rather than having to give half of the revenue to Ulta or to JCPenney, then that may have made it worth investing in some of those shades. And certainly I think if you can offer a product for half of the regular price, that you're going to be much more attractive, and people are going to be much more willing to give you a try. And I also think that it may be that you are training people to buy from your website, and if you can do that, then they might actually buy other products from your website, and certainly the profit margins on those products are going to be a lot higher than if you sell them through Ulta. So I don't know how people would feel about that. I don't know if that is something that anyone would find attractive or acceptable, and I think you'd have to do a lot of discussions and a lot of market research And another question that I have is whether or not it is worth contemplating whether companies may be considered to be acceptable if what they are doing is focusing on a particular niche in the market in terms of things like coloring or skin tone rather than focusing on the whole market. And so the question is whether or not that is actually at all acceptable or whether that is totally not acceptable. And so let me give you a couple examples. First of all, there are a couple of brands that are targeting people just with darker skin tones and that are not making any products at all for people with lighter skin tones. So one of these is Fashion Fair, and this has historically been what it has done all the way back to the 1960s. They did go bankrupt at one point, and then they got sold to new owners, and that is the strategy that the new owners are pursuing as well, that they are just offering shades for people with tan skin and darker. And Amy Collet is a company that also had that strategy where they were just targeting dark skin tones. Amy Collet has just gone out of business, and I do think that there were a lot of problems with Amy Collet. Some people did really, really like the company and certain products from the company. I do think that there were some product quality problems that people pretty much universally said that their lip glosses went bad really fast, and there was an eyeshadow, a cream eyeshadow that's at least one of the shades. A lot of the inventory was really defective in terms of the complaints that I saw about it, in terms of both user reviews and in terms of influencer reviews. And I don't want to criticize Amy Collet, and they're not even in business anymore. But I do think that it's not necessarily the case that we should take the fact that Amy Collet is no longer in business to mean that there is no room in the marketplace for companies that are segmenting in terms of, for instance, skin tone. Another example that I would like to propose is a brand called Kulfi, and Kulfi is a brand that is designed specifically to target people who are from India or from other South Asian countries, and so those people do tend to have a narrower range of skin tones than the entire breadth of the population. And so some of the products that they sell in terms of their lipstick shades and things like that are designed to complement those. And so far, Kulfi has introduced some concealers, but they have not introduced any foundation, and I would imagine that it would be much easier for them to introduce a foundation that the people that are in their target audience might be able to use if they didn't feel obliged to introduce 40 shades of that foundation. And so my question here, is that okay? Do we allow them to do that, or do we say, no, you are introducing a foundation, and so therefore you need to cover everybody? And another group of people that I think are highly, highly underserved are people with olive skin tones. And there are some companies now that are making a few products for people with olive skin tones, but particularly for some people, especially if they have light skin that leans olive, there can be an awfully lot of difficulty finding both foundations that work for them and then other color cosmetics as well. And so I don't think it's inconceivable that a company that did target people with olive skin tones with products that are especially likely to match their skin or to look good on their skin might be very successful, and they might be able to just be offering a few shades rather than a lot of shades in order to match those people. But another question is, should we allow that, or should that be something that if people are going to offer any kind of foundation, they need to offer 40 shades and everybody needs to be able to get it? And I think it's possible that there may be other viable market niches as well. And certainly I don't think that we would want to see larger companies or medium companies doing that. I think that what you want is for those companies to be making products for everyone. But I think that the question is whether or not a small company might be able to provide a good product experience if they were more niche. And I don't know whether or not that would be perceived as acceptable or not. And then I think another thing that might eventually resolve a lot of these issues is that probably in the future, as we move more into AI, that the foundations may be customizable for each person based on your actual particular skin tone, and that we may be finding ways in order to actually figure out what people's skin tones are and then just creating a skin tone foundation that would be perfect for them. And things are moving so quickly in these kinds of areas that I wouldn't be surprised if this happened really, really quickly, in which case all of these problems might be resolved. And I wonder if people have any other ideas with regard to how this particular issue might be best handled, and so I would be interested in hearing any ideas that people have. And now let's move on to a different topic that I haven't seen discussed very much, but that I think may be worth discussing. And that is whether, if you as a company are accused of racism, how is the best way to respond, or what should you be trying to do with regard to that? And so if we look at Youthforia, it seems to me that they did try quite a few different ways of resolving the problem, and that they never figured out what to do about it, and in some cases the things that they did just exacerbated the issue. And so, well, certainly some people may say that the company was acting entirely disingenuously. I think if we look at it just in terms of the surface, what seems to have happened is that the owner tried to explain the situation to make people more understand their point of view on it. They then apologized, and they decided to try to rush to fix the situation as quickly as possible. And then eventually, when they concluded that there was nothing that they could say that would make the situation better, and that it just kept getting worse, then they went radio silent for a while. Then they hired someone at probably a very high salary, I would think, to try to resolve the issue and apologize some more, and then eventually they went out of business. Now, there's one more thing that I haven't talked about yet that I think actually might be the most important thing of all. And so for this, I want to read you a quote from a woman who has spent her life covering the beauty and fashion industry, so for about 20 or 25 years. And so she is a professional journalist, and she now has a YouTube channel that is called Not Fit for Print Beauty. And her name is Rebecca. And her comment was, "My theory is that Youthforia went out of business because it's an overcrowded marketplace, and their products were not interesting enough, and their marketing was not interesting enough, and not enough people bought from them, and therefore they're going out of business." And so her point was, yes, they released this totally black foundation, and this was a problem, and they got in trouble. But that's not what drove them out of business, and what drove them out of business is the fact that they just didn't produce good products, and they didn't market them very well. And what I do think is the case is that from the moment that that foundation was released, and from the moment that some people started to say, you don't have any shades that are dark enough for me, you need to fix that, that the entire focus of the company was on that particular matter. And that all of the other kinds of marketing types of things that they were doing up until that point totally went out the window. So there were no more new products that were released. There were no really interviews that were done even. There were no exciting promotions or advertising. And that it really seemed to be that the company founder and maybe the other people that were working there as well were, one, they were upset enough about this that they lost their confidence, and that secondly, that they put all of their money and all of their effort into addressing the issue with regard to the shades. And so I do think this is an important point, and I certainly do think it's the case to be listening to customer complaints and to be trying to fix things, but when it comes to what is going to make the company succeed versus fail, that may actually not be the most important thing. And what really may be the most important thing is sticking to the core competency of the company and not getting your attention diverted away from that too much by these kinds of issues that really you need to certainly be at a minimum standard when it comes to handling these kinds of issues. And if there are problems, then I think you need to be doing your reasonable best to be fixing them in a authentic and sincere manner. But if it comes to spending all of your time and energy and emotional equilibrium focused on these things, then I think that that is maybe putting the eggs in the wrong basket. And I certainly think that in this case, the determination to fix the problem really fast actually turned out to be very, very counterproductive, because if they had more taken their time and pursued the same timeline that they originally were, or sped it up a little bit, then they would have found out by proper market research that the foundation that they were thinking about launching actually was not an appropriate one. And I think that after that real debacle with that shade 600, it may have been impossible for them to ever recover. But I do think that if they ever did recover, that they probably were not going to be selling very much foundation to people with really dark skin, because I think that those people were very clear that they didn't want to buy that foundation now, and that they were really mad. And it's very hard to change people's mind when they get really, really mad like that. And so while I think that you do need to offer a variety of different shades as sort of a cost of doing business, regardless of whether or not you sell them, possibly, I think that it's still probably focusing on trying to fix that problem when it may not be fixable may not have been a great strategy. Of course, this does assume that they weren't being pressured by retailers, and that the retailers weren't giving them a deadline that they had to meet. But on the other hand, if a retailer is giving that kind of deadline, and it is going to make the company have the potential of making really serious mistakes, then it may be better just to get out of the retailer in general. And I think that at the beginning, even after they introduced the foundation shades that got some criticism, they still were doing quite well. And so if they had continued to focus on bringing out new products, continued to focus on marketing those products in creative ways, and going back and introducing more shades when they could, that I think that they would have been in a better position to just keep selling the products even if they did lose a retailer. And I do think that for certain people, and maybe especially for people that are very well-meaning and that do want to be doing good things in the world, that being accused of doing bad things and of being a bad person, and of specifically in this case of being racist, that this can be very, very demoralizing for people and can be very, very hard for them, and can keep them from really wanting to do anything, and can make them either go into a panic or a real depression. And so I think that thinking about, from a psychological point of view or an emotional point of view, how to respond to those kinds of criticisms, which you may get regardless of how well-meaning you are, that is something that I think that would be worth considering. And so now let's talk about a few other examples when companies have been accused of racism, or when race has been discussed in a contentious way. And I do think that as the manager of a company, you tend to be pulled into a lot of different directions. And so the question is, how do you decide what the right thing is to do in the right situation? So, for instance, if we look at Glossier, Glossier is a company that I think did make do some things that were problematic in the early years. And in particular, I do think that their original company, although it was supposed to be celebrating all kinds of individual beauty, it really was focused just on people with light skin, and that was really the only shades of product that they made at the beginning. And that over time that they did start to offer more shades. And then eventually the company opened some stores, and I think that particularly in the stores that there were complaints that things were going on that had racist overtones, or that made people of certain skin colors uncomfortable, and that the company did not do enough to address that, and that this was a problem. And so, for instance, there was a website on Instagram, I guess, and this was called Out of the Gloss, and so former employees of the company got together to share these experiences, and this did get a lot of attention. And the way that Glossier handled this was that they published an Instagram letter, and they acknowledged that this was an issue, And then there was a long plan of action that discussed all the things that Glossier was planning to do to fix this. And I don't know that people necessarily bought into this right away, and there were a lot of people that said that this was just performative and that they didn't believe it and that the company had acted really badly. But eventually the Out of the Glass Instagram site stopped posting new content, and I am not sure how Glossier is doing with regard to their employees, and they don't actually have that many stores now anyway, and so therefore that may have made it a lot easier. And in 2023, the company came out with a new product, which was called their Stretch Foundation. And this is a medium coverage foundation, and it is available in 32 shades. And if you look at the breakdown here, they actually have more shades, considerably more shades for darker skin tones than they do for lighter skin tones. And so in this case, I think that it was interesting that they made a special effort, it seems, with this foundation to make it appealing and to make enough shades available for people with darker skin tones. Whether or not people with darker skin tones are still very enthusiastic about buying from Glossier, I don't know. And I don't feel like that foundation is selling very well, and I do think that some people with lighter skin tones do have problems getting their shade in that foundation line because there aren't all that many shades that are available for people with light skin tones. But I do think at least that offering a particularly large amount of shades for people with darker skin may have been an olive branch, maybe, that suggested that they were really trying to make a company that was inclusive, and that may have been more important than selling the optimal number of bottles of shades anyway. And Tarte is a brand that has struggled with these issues a number of times in public. And so one case was the Tarte Shape Tape, and that was accused in 2018 of not having enough shades, and so they did introduce more shades in that one. And then there was an issue with some of their influencer trips. So Tarte is a brand that spends a lot of their marketing dollars taking influencers from TikTok or YouTube or whatever on brand trips and paying for them to go to expensive lodging and giving them expensive gifts and being in exotic type locales. And so at first there were complaints that all of the influencers that were invited on the trips were white and that there were not any people in color that were invited. And then later on, when some people of color were invited on the trips, that there were some accusations of unequal treatment, with some of these people suggesting that compared to some of the other influencers that their rooms hadn't been as nice or that their itineraries were different. And one individual did a tearful video suggesting that while she knew that some of the other influencers on the trip had bigger followings than she did, the situation still made her feel like she was being treated like a second-tier person. And so the response with regard to that is that the CEO was seen to at first minimize the issue when she responded to it, and then later on they did pledge to be more equal and to think more about these issues. And eventually they did hire a director of DEI, and they implemented a creator advisory group, and they launched a Shape Your Future Awards supporting Black female entrepreneurs through financial awards and mentorship opportunities. And a lot of people, it says here on Google AI, still are really skeptical about this. In general, one other thing that I would say is that once you make a mistake and people get mad at you, it's very hard to come back and to make the case that you actually are pro diversity and that you actually are caring about all of your customers. That once people find what you do to be problematic, it seems like people are very slow to forgive. And so I think that that is something to keep in mind, and that before doing things, that thinking through how they are going to be perceived, or to research that before you actually make a concrete mistake may be a good idea. Now, one thing that has occurred to me is that Tarte does have specific knowledge of how helpful each of these influencers has been to their business, and so they know how much traffic each influencer has gotten to visit the Tarte site, and they have at least some information on the extent to which these people actually have made purchases from the site. Now, this is not exact information because people may not buy right away, or they may buy from a retailer like Sephora rather than from the site, but I still think they have very good information on which of these influencers has been the most helpful for them. And so if we look at how business is typically done, then companies do very often give their best salespeople special rewards. And these influencers certainly count as salespeople. And so what if it is the case that none of your best salespeople turn out to be people of color? And does that matter? And do you invite them on the trip anyway? And it does seem like in the case of Tarte that the expectation of many people who discussed this situation was that they should be invited anyway. Now, another company that I think is taken a bit of a different path has been Hourglass. And so Hourglass is a company that used to be independent, and it was purchased by Unilever now. And so I would say that because they are purchased by Unilever, that probably they have access to really, 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 really good PR. And that they are probably paying a very large amount of money for the PR that they are getting. And so therefore that the decisions that Hourglass is making are probably not things that they are just doing on their own, but probably things that they have been advised to do by the Unilever PR people, I would think. And so what people have accused Hourglass of doing in a kind of a scattershot way is of not having, especially their holiday palettes or their powder products, be diverse enough in terms of the brightness of the shades. And so there doesn't seem to be as much criticism with regard to the foundation type products, but with regard to these palettes, the issue here, I think, is that in the past that the Hourglass strategy has been, the Hourglass look is to create a really muted makeup look, more like no makeup, and kind of elegant looking. And in the past, all of the shades that they have offered have been very, very light and very muted, and so when people with dark skin tones would put those on, they wouldn't see them at all. Hourglass has made some efforts to introduce some brighter shades in some of their palettes, and they've been doing that for the past couple of years, and I think that those palettes are more attractive to some people that have darker skin. I'm still not sure that they would be appropriate for people with really, really dark skin. And I do think also that some people that have light skin but that want a brighter makeup look have actually liked these products. So it has been positive for that reason. But I think the thing about Hourglass that's interesting is that they have never addressed this at all, to my knowledge, and that they are sort of radio silent on all of it, and that they seem to be just going about their business and gradually introducing the shades. It's not like they're being obstinate and not introducing brighter shades, but they're not talking about it, and they're not doing it all in one day, and they are taking their time with regard to it. So one question that I have is, would following the Hourglass strategy have been a better idea for Youthforia to begin with? And I'm talking here about their first launch of foundations when they just had 15 shades, and when the complaints were that there were not enough shades for darker people, and that the shades that they did have seemed to be misrepresented on the website. Would it have been better for them to just say nothing rather than apologizing or explaining? Or would it be better for them to have changed that photograph on the website to make it more representative of what the actual foundation looked like? Maybe just say thanks for letting us know that the picture didn't give you a good idea of what the foundation looks like. Here's the picture. And not apologized. Should they have maybe done an interview with a sympathetic magazine like Women's Wear Daily and talked about the fact that they were planning to introduce more shades and that they were hoping that those would go over well? Is there something that they could do rather than doing apology videos? And when is it that doing nothing and remaining silent and maybe not getting too upset about it? I don't know that the people at Hourglass got upset when people complained that they didn't have shades that were bright enough, but I kind of doubt that they got as upset as maybe Fiona seems to have gotten. And by the way, of course, I do not know her. I have never talked to her, and it might be disrespectful for me to be using her first name, but it seems to be something that I just slip up and do on occasion in this video, simply because of expedience, I guess. And so let's talk about one story that is actually fairly current, and this is actually outside of the makeup industry, but I think it's still one that is interesting to me. And so this is about a woman named Patti LuPone. And so she is a really, really well-known theater performer. She has done dozens and dozens of Broadway shows and dozens of other shows. And she has mostly been known as a musical actress, but very recently, about a year ago, she was in a two-woman play on Broadway that was just a quiet little two-person play. And so this was called The Roommate, and her co-star in this play was Mia Farrow. And so Patti LuPone was 75 and Mia Farrow was 79. And apparently this play, The Roommate, did end up getting good reviews, and Mia Farrow did end up getting a Tony nomination for it the following year. And then on the other side of the wall in this Broadway theater area from The Roommate was a musical that was called Hell's Kitchen. And this was written by Alicia Keys, and it had a primarily black cast. And one of the cast members was a woman named Keisha Lewis. And so one thing to know is that these Broadway theaters, they really have not been renovated since they were built. And so if we look back to when they were built, they were really just having very minimal amplification. They basically just had orchestras and people singing really loud. And so therefore, when we look at modern acoustics and at the kinds of shows that are being performed there, they are much more loud than they were in the past. And this is the case with many musicals on Broadway, not just this particular one. And so in this case, what seemed to be happening is that some of the music that was from Hell's Kitchen could be heard in the theater where The Roommate was being performed. And that this was noticeable to both the cast members and the audience, and that at some points in the play that the dialogue was not even able to be heard, and that it was also disruptive of sort of the emotional experience of going to see that particular play. And so apparently the people that were putting on The Roommate discussed this issue, and Patti LuPone volunteered to call either the producers or the theater owner and to ask that there be some changes made so that the sound from the Hell's Kitchen wouldn't be interrupting the Roommate play. And so the people agreed to do that, and the sound people changed some of the volume levels and changed some of the cues, and then Patti LuPone sent some flowers to those people, the sound and the stage management people, in appreciation for that. And so then toward the end of November in 2024, Keisha Lewis posted an Instagram video, and this was directed specifically at Patti LuPone, and it was 6 minutes long. And what she said in the video, she described what happened, and she played a video that she had of Patti LuPone stating that she was not going to sign a program for Hell's Kitchen because that show was too loud. I think it's a little bit odd to ask someone who's in a different show to sign a program for a show that you saw, but that the person was not in it. I think that's a little bit unusual. And so in this video, Keisha Lewis accused Patti LuPone of being, quote, bullying, offensive, racially microaggressive, rude, rooted in privilege, and said that her actions also indicated a lack of sense of community and leadership. And she said that, I want to explain what a microaggression is. These are subtle, unintentional comments that convey stereotypes, biases, or assumptions about someone based on their race. Microaggressions can seem harmless or minor, but can accumulate and cause significant stress or discomfort to the recipient. Examples include calling a black show loud in a way that dismisses it. Comments like these can be seen as racial microaggressions. And at one point in the video, she referred to the lowering of the volume as being an unnecessary change. And she made the conclusion that it was important on Broadway to support underrepresented communities and said that every production brings unique value to Broadway. On Broadway, we're not just neighbor, we are a community. It's important that we respect each other's hard work on and off the stage and to be a part of a community that recognizes and values all shows for their unique contributions and energy that celebrates the diversity of voices and sounds and stories that we all bring to the stage. I respectfully submit to you that you owe us an apology, not flowers. And so People magazine decided that this was a good story for them to cover, and in their article they reported that Audra McDonald had commented on that video on the Instagram account, and that her emojis had 2 hearts and 2 hand clapping. So it seemed that she was in favor of this particular Instagram video. And so Audra McDonald is a well-known Broadway actress and also to some extent like a television actress. So she has been in The Gilded Age, for instance. And she previously worked with Patti LuPone on a variety of different projects. So I did see them together in the original Masterclass back in the 1990s. And then I also saw them in a couple of shows that they did at the Ravinia Festival near Chicago. So I saw them in a couple Sondheim shows. One was, I think, Passion, and then the other one was Sweeney Todd. And so the way that the people from The Roommate handled the situation was that the next day on Instagram, they posted a note that was directed towards the producers of the Hell's Kitchen production in general. And the note said that they were really grateful that they turned down the sound and that it made a really big difference, and that they were really glad that Hell's Kitchen was doing so well on Broadway, and that they wanted to continue to have the show be successful. And to my knowledge, that was the only response that Patti LuPone made to that, at least publicly. I don't know what she did privately. And so The Roommate closed the following month, and Hell's Kitchen is continued to run, and Keisha Lewis has continued to be in that show. And so then, about 6 months later, Patti LuPone was in an article in The New Yorker, and the article was actually mentioned sort of on the front flap of The New Yorker, so it got a lot of attention, and it was a long article. And I would say that the New Yorker article was basically had the theme of Patti LuPone is a diva, and look at all the things that she did that are kind of on the outrageous side. Look at all the stuff that she said about people. Look at how she acts when she's in public. And so in the article, she makes sort of catty comments about many other people, famous people especially, and some of these include people like Glenn Close and Kevin Kline and Andrew Lloyd Webber and Donald Trump, and really just a whole variety of different people. And the article starts out by saying, LuPone is Broadway's reigning grande dame with a big voice and an even bigger mouth. She's one of the city's last living broads, brassy, belty, and profane with the ferocity of a bullet train coming right at you. Her bluntness has made her into a kind of urban folk hero. And then here's another paragraph from the article. It says, when she was starring in company, LuPone would carry a bullhorn and yell at pedestrians from her car window. It's impossible for us to get to work, she told me. And I said that years ago, so I start work angry. I can't get to my theater because of the traffic pattern, because of the arrogance of the people in the streets. It's a road. Get out of the street. And then at the end of the article, the reporter asked her about her opinions about the video that Keisha had posted, and also about the comment that Audra had made in terms of those emojis. And so you can see in the article what Patti LuPone is quoted as saying about those people. And then soon after the article came out, then there was an open letter that was distributed. And the open letter was signed by more than 500 people who were supposedly members of the Broadway theater community. And the article objected to the comments that Patti LuPone had made specifically about Keisha Lewis and about Audra McDonald, and their thrust was that she was not an appropriate person to be participating in the Broadway theater community, and that she should be forbidden from attending the Tonys or any kinds of industry events. And so you can read the exact wording. And then almost immediately, Patti LuPone came out with a letter of apology, and so you can read what she wrote. And that letter did get a lot of immediate coverage and discussion, especially since she said in the letter that she had never apologized to anyone, and this was the first time. And then the following week, the Tonys took place, and a lot of people wondered whether Patti LuPone would attend the Tonys, and she did not attend, and there wasn't much discussion of the event at the Tonys as far as I saw, but Mia Farrow did mention that she had really enjoyed working with her. And Audra McDonald had been starring in the musical Gypsy recently, and so she was nominated for the Tony, and she did perform a song from Gypsy at the Tonys, but she did not win the award. And then about 3 or 4 weeks later, there was an announcement that the Gypsy production was going to be closing early, and that the reason was because the sales had been low. And then Patti LuPone was quiet for about 2 months, didn't say anything. And then just a couple of days ago, she posted on her Instagram account that she was going to be appearing at the Aspen Music Festival in her own one-woman show. And she got a lot of comments from people that seemed to be her loyal fans, that seemed to be excited about that, and I didn't see any negative comments on that at all. So I'm a little bit wondering why it is that her particular apology was accepted as being okay, when in other cases, when people apologize for things that may not be considered to be okay, or in some cases it may make the situation worse. And I'm wondering what you think the differences are. And one thing that I've thought about quite a bit is whether or not the response that the team from The Roommate had to the Keisha Lewis video, whether that was actually a good thing to do or whether or not there was something that they could have done that was better. So I can see why, especially if The Roommate was in its last days, that there was an impetus not to spin it out into a situation that was worse, and not to get into an argument about it or waste the effort on that. And then after the production of The Roommate closed, I think that people felt like it was too late to respond and that it was better just to kind of let it go. And I also think it was the case that if you look at sort of the buzz of the Broadway community, and which I've done, for instance, by looking at the Reddit Broadway threads, that an awfully lot of people seem to be on Patti LuPone's side with regard to this, and to suggest that it was indeed the case that Hell's Kitchen was very loud and that it was ruining the play for The Roommate, and that something needed to be done about it. So if I had been Patti LuPone, I think I would have had a very difficult time saying nothing. And I think that what she ended up doing, which is to share her thoughts with the reporter in a catty way, and then for the reporter to frame it in a way that made her look probably particularly bad, was probably sort of not the optimal way to do it. And that it may actually have been worthwhile to actually just do something like to do a response video on Instagram and to make a statement and leave it at that, and then never talk about it again ever with anyone. And if anyone asked, like the New Yorker reporter asked, just to say, I already said what I have to say, and that is it. And if I were going to do it, and I may be totally wrong, and so if I am, then please tell me that, but I think that if I were going to do something like that, I would say something like, so this is a response to your video, Keisha, and so I wanted to clarify a few things. The first thing is that I want to make sure that the people from Hell's Kitchen are aware that I do think that that is a show that we really want to have on Broadway, and that it is good to have more shows of different kinds with different kinds of people in them, and I think that it is a really good show and an asset to have it here, and that I think that your performance in it was really good. And that I totally agree with you that there is a need for diversity here on Broadway, and that is something that I totally support. On the other hand, I do think that that kind of diversity also has to do with the play that I was working in. And so I think that diversity includes people of all ages, including women who are of a certain age or who are over 70 or over 75, and that these are people that are not represented very well in terms of both Broadway and in terms of society in general, or certainly theater or acting in general. And that in general, that the play that I was in was just as important as other plays, and that the fact that I know that this is not the fault of anyone here. I think it's the fault of the way that these theaters were built a long time ago, and that it's very expensive to rebuild these theaters, but that nonetheless what happened because of the situation is that the music from Hell's Kitchen was interrupting the play that I was in to the extent that audiences were not able to enjoy it, and that it was damaging the success of the play. And that it was my hope that when I took on this play, that having it be on Broadway and having it be successful on Broadway would allow the play to be performed by more theater companies, and that this would give women who were older more of a chance to have a really good role that they could perform in. And so I did feel that it was the obligation of me or someone else on the cast of The Roommate to figure out a way to resolve this issue in a way that would make Hell's Kitchen continue to be successful. There's certainly no reason to make Hell's Kitchen less successful, but that would allow the play that I was involved in to be successful also. Now, I do think it's possible that there could have been a way that The Roommate might have addressed this issue in a different way that might have been less upsetting or less offensive to people that are working on the program. And I do think that this is not the last time that something like this is going to happen on Broadway, and that if there were accepted protocols for helping to figure out how to resolve this kind of a situation in a collegial way, that that might be helpful to the whole Broadway community. And so therefore, if you or other people on your production have ideas of how that could occur, then I would encourage you to share those with me or with the community in general, so we can figure out a way that we can all work together here in this very small percentage of real estate space in order for us all to be able to be successful and producing good work. And I do want to make it clear that it was never my intention to cause harm to the production or to cause disrespect to the production, and that if I didn't handle it in the correct way, then I wish that I had handled it in a way that was more correct. But the other thing that I want to say is that I think that you are well aware that stating that someone has committed a racial microaggression is basically the same thing as calling them a racist, and that it certainly is the case that calling someone a racist is basically the worst thing that you could possibly call them, and that therefore that when you did this publicly in the way that you did, that this actually was intended to harm me, and that it was intended to harm the play that I was in. And I do find that to be objectionable, because I did not intend to cause you any harm, and I don't think I actually did cause harm. And so therefore I do think that I would like to have an apology for that. Thank you very much. So I'm not sure if I personally had been in that situation, if I actually would have said something like that, but I think I would have had a hard time saying nothing. And I think that it can be really difficult to know how to respond when you do get these kinds of accusations. And I think that those accusations are fairly common at this point. And so I would be interested in hearing what people have to say about that topic. Now, one other thing that I will just say before I finish up is that since Youthforia has decided to close, I've read some of the comments in various places that people have been sharing about that company, and what I feel like I am seeing an awfully lot is that people are really, really happy that the company is closing, and that they feel that this is a just end to the situation, and that no other kind of restitution would have been appropriate or sufficient. And I find this to be really interesting, and I'm not sure that that is entirely healthy, that the idea is that if people make a mistake, and I think that It could be that you think that people that worked for Youthforia were actually, so racist that they are irredeemable and that there is no way for them to be able to get any better. I kind of don't believe that about most people, and I would like to believe that there is a path towards redemption and that all of us do make mistakes and that we learn from our mistakes and we try to do better and that there is some grace in the world. And in this case, I think that people are not allowing there to be any chance for grace. And I think that if you look back at some of the things that I did when I was in my 20s, I feel like I am glad that I learned from those mistakes and that those are mistakes that I don't want to make again. But I don't think that it is especially healthy to stone people to death when they do make mistakes or even when they do things that are wrong, even if they do it unknowingly, because I think that there is the potential for people to become better. And so my hope would be that we can get to a point where our goal is to help people to become better, because I think that if we can do that, then there's more potential for there to be better things in the world rather than for there to be increased divisiveness and for some people to feel that they are permanent victims and there's nothing they can do about it, and for other people to also feel like they are permanent victims because of what happened and that there's nothing that they can do about it. I don't think that's a good way to have a society, and so I am hoping to see that change, and that is just my personal point of view. And with regard to the comment section, I do think that a main thing that I would like to do with this video is to have a discussion about these topics. I don't think that I have seen nearly enough civil discussion about this topic, and I do think that there are some things that we would do well to be discussing and for us to be sharing our thoughts and learning from one another, and so I do hope people will share those thoughts here. I do also, in general, with regard to the comment sections in my Facebook groups and in my videos, that I think it's really important to not be calling other people names or to be accusing people of being stupid or problematic in terms of their morals or to have negative characteristics, any of that stuff. And so I would ask people not to do that. And I would ask people not to say to other people that they should not have said what they did say. I think that that is a way for us to not actually have a conversation and to just be in argumentative mode. And I do think that when we call people racists, that is not something that is necessarily helpful in terms of us understanding one another, and that rather it's the same kind of a derogatory name as many of the other names that people are called. And so I would like to ask people not to be calling other people that, either other people that are contributing or other people that are just in the world in general. I would prefer not to see that here. So thank you very much for watching all the way to the end of the video, and as I say, I hope that you will comment if you have any thoughts on any of these topics. In addition, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, then I hope you will go ahead and do that. And if you like this video, then I hope you will hit like. And Coco and I do love you very much, and so I hope you are having a good August. Goodbye.